What's the FreeWheel about?
Well, the FreeWheel is something that works with a wheelchair that makes it easier to move around outdoors. Actually, it was about 9 years ago this week. I was in an accident that left me in a wheelchair.
Okay.
And ever since then, I've been trying to get around outdoors in backyards, playing with my kids. I found it very difficult. Very difficult to move a wheelchair by myself outdoors. Everything that makes it very good indoors, the small casters, the footprint of the wheelchair, makes it great indoors. Those same features make it difficult outdoors. And so I wanted to move around outdoors, and so I started working on the FreeWheel. It's a wheelchair attachment that fits on the front of my wheelchair, and it basically transforms my four-wheel wheelchair into a three-wheel stroller.
Okay, so before we show people what it looks like, I'm curious about the passion. You mentioned your children. You have 2 children, and you said you wanted to be able to be outside and play with them and interact with them. And that I think comes from your background, right, of being an outdoor enthusiast. Were there other passions in addition to your kids that drove you to want to be more mobile outside?
Well, yes, I'm a do-it-yourselfer. You put a do-it-yourselfer in a wheelchair, and you never know what you're going to get. It's true. It was unacceptable to me to be in the backyard and not be able to move around and play with my kids. Unacceptable from within. Mm-hmm. I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to be a good dad, even though I was in a wheelchair. I guess I kind of felt I didn't want my kids to lose out in any way because I was in a wheelchair. And so I think I already used the word unacceptable. It was unacceptable to me not to be able to move around easily outdoors. Mm-hmm. And so that's what started the process of coming up with the FreeWheel.
That's great. So where do you keep the FreeWheel?
Where do I keep it? Well, I actually have one with me. I store it on the back of my chair. And this is a FreeWheel. And as you can see, it's a 12-inch wheel, and it mounts on the front of my chair. When I'm not using it, like when I'm indoors, I store it on the back of my chair on a perch that comes with it, so that no matter where I go, I always have it with me. In addition, and since I live alone, I don't have to ask anybody to go get it. I don't have to pick it up off the floor. I'd probably fall out of my wheelchair if I tried to pick it up off the floor. So these things are kind of important when you're trying to get something done. So I have it with me all the time, and when I need it, I can just grab it, put it on, and away I go.
Now, you have some interesting stories about traveling through airports with the FreeWheel.
Well, it's true. I've been showing off my FreeWheel at trade shows all over the country, which requires me to fly all over the country. And I typically use my FreeWheel all the way to the door of the airplane. Okay. It's unusual. I should say, you know, the flight attendants, the airport workers are not used to seeing someone come through the airport with an extra wheel and actually carrying their own baggage. And they often just kind of shake their head and say, what was that that just went by?
Flew by.
So that's kind of fun. But, you know, it's a way to get me through the airport. I could travel on my own, carry my own baggage on top of the FreeWheel on my next product, which is a rack that fits on top of the FreeWheel. And so these ideas of mine help me be independent, help me travel through the airports on my own, help me get stuff done.
And so it's about your independence, your freedom of mobility, and ability to interact not only with your kids, but with the world at large.
Well, I think you're right. And I mentioned before, I've been a do-it-yourselfer my whole life. And then at 40 years of age, I break my neck. I'm still a do-it-yourselfer. When you're in a wheelchair, you're dying to be independent. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be a burden to 2 or 3 people to help you through doors and get things done. You want to do it yourself, and not detract from everybody else's efforts, but hopefully add to everybody. You know, be a successful, productive worker. And I found that carrying my own bags, pushing myself through. I love opening doors for people. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, I bet it catches them by surprise.
It might.
Yeah, and it's a fun thing for you too. So with the FreeWheel, you've mentioned being able to get in and out of your vehicle. You drive your own vehicle, in and out of airports, being in the backyard and grass. What other terrain does the FreeWheel help people to navigate?
Oh my gosh. You know, when you're pushing on a sidewalk in a wheelchair, you're constantly looking down 2 feet in front of you so that you will be prepared for that half-inch bump that will send you screeching to a halt and possibly throwing you out of your chair. This is what I've found. When you're outdoors pushing, you're antisocial because you're staring right there
Sure.
to make sure that you're prepared for the bump you're about to hit. With a FreeWheel on your wheelchair, you can roll over all that stuff and you feel more secure. You also can look up and be social.
So we were talking about the kinds of terrain that the FreeWheel works on, and that being focused on the cracks in a sidewalk really limits people's ability to socially interact, almost creating a sense of isolation from the world around them. What else have you experienced or witnessed as people become free with the FreeWheel on the front of their wheelchairs?
Well, it does create a bit of isolation. In addition, sometimes you almost feel like a burden if someone is pushing you or walking with you and having to slow down to stay with you. With the FreeWheel on, you can actually keep a better pace because it's easier to push. You can interact with people around you because you can look at them and talk with them. You can look around and see things that you normally miss because you're staring right in front of you. And so grass, gravel, pathways, snow, trails are all now not off limits.
In fact, you've gotten stories from around the world about where people have been able to go using their FreeWheels. What are some of your favorites?
Well, one of my favorites, I just heard this story the other month. A friend of mine actually she's from California, but she went to Africa to help with some sort of elephant conservation program. So they're in the safari, literally. Mm-hmm. And a gal shows up from the Netherlands in a wheelchair. And she's motoring around the savannah, I guess, with a FreeWheel on her wheelchair. And so my friend from California runs up to her and she goes, "Hey, where'd you get that FreeWheel? I know the guy who makes that." And the gal looks up at her and says, "Well, I know him too." And this is in the middle of the bush in Africa.
People are talking about you everywhere.
I guess so. Well, anyway, she got around everywhere she needed to go. And obviously there wasn't a path or a sidewalk or a road, a developed road to roll on for miles. Didn't matter. So that was so funny when she came back from Africa and told me that story. She wondered if I'd be interested. Well, I am.
And now we're telling even more people about
Yeah.
it. You've also mentioned people on beaches actually being able to take their wheelchair onto sandy beaches and enjoy that I'm going to call it the romantic stroll along the ocean side. What's that been like to hear about?
Well, one of the common questions people have, can you take that on sand? And the answer is, of course you can. Now, sometimes I like to say you can get stuck deeper in the woods. But I've actually gone clamming at low tide up in Cape Cod with my family. And without it, I couldn't have done it. I really couldn't have done it. I would have been too stuck.
So you would have been stuck up in the parking lot watching the kids out by the water, and they're old enough now that you could do that. When they were young, of course, that would have been really difficult and impossible because even the kids couldn't have gone out to the beach without an adult being down near them.
Right. Often is the case before the FreeWheel. Activities were so sedentary for me. I'd park by a table, park underneath some shade, and that was it. But now I'm out in the water, I should say at the low tide pools, digging clams. I think I dug more clams than my kids. Super fun.
That's great. You've also had an opportunity